Hello friends from Nuskin. Thank you for joining me here at Nuskin Live. I was looking forward to meeting all of you in person, but in life, things may not always go according to our plans, and we've got to pivot, adjust, and make the best of the cards that we're dealt with. Now you're here because you're high performers, and we're determined and we're goal focused, but that can also make it harder to deal with unexpected changes. So I want to share a couple of stories from my professional and personal lives. In 2007, I was a young CEO at 36, and I was honored to be given a chance to build an airline from scratch. So I put together a detailed business plan, raised capital from international investors, applied for licenses and permits, and acquired my first plane. And it wasn't just another airline, but a new airline model that did not exist in the global aviation industry, which is a long-haul, low-cost airlines. And the next 7 years of growing the airline from that one plane to a fleet of 25 billion US in annual revenue and getting it public listed, I learned that none of my business plans or budgets ever turned out as we had meticulously planned. So we launched in November 2007 with our very first flight to the Gold Coast. But in just a few months, the 2008 global financial crisis hit. All the banks that we had signed agreement to provide us with financing facilities to acquire new aircraft all pulled out. And I learned about legal clauses like force majeure or material adverse circumstance that allowed the banks to pull out even after signing the loan contracts. Now in the same year, oil prices went crazy, right? It had been in the range of $50 to $75 from 2002 to 2007, and that's what our business plan was based on. But in 6 months of 2008, it doubled to $147 by June. Now, oil is 50% of our airline's cost, and no plan could have anticipated this shock. Now, on top of that, all the banks advise airlines to hedge their fuel as a way to mitigate the risk of oil price volatility, and that's what many airlines did, including us. Now, when we started to lock in the price of oil, it was about $100 a barrel, right? And we were relieved that when it peaked at $147 in June, 6 months later, it turned out it collapsed all the way to $32 a barrel, right? When we had locked in at a price of $100, that caused 50 airlines around the world to go bankrupt. And we narrowly avoided that fate because the bank who was the counterparty to our hedging contract, well, they went bankrupt first. What a narrow escape. And every single year after that, there was one shock after another. For example, in 2010, there was the Icelandic volcanic eruption that closed down the entire European airspace for a whole week, leaving thousands of our passengers stranded in London and stranded in Kuala Lumpur. And the very next year, we started flights to Tokyo, and we were immediately hit by the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear tragedy. The following year, just when we started flights to Christchurch, New Zealand, the city got hit by 2 earthquakes, and we had to pull out and withdraw from that market. And it wasn't just natural disasters. Every year we had to deal with a difficult policy or regulatory environment with restrictions being imposed on us to limit competition with national airlines. But nothing compared to 2014, when we had not 1, not 2, but 3 black swan events. Now, black swans are rare events, difficult to predict, and it has major consequences. In our case, we had the MH370, where a plane disappeared in March. Then in July, there was MH17, where a plane was shot down over Ukraine. And finally, QZ8501 in December, when a plane was lost en route from Indonesia to Singapore. Now, although none of the planes were from my airline, it severely impacted demand for travel to Malaysia and caused a 30% reduction in revenue. The first year as a public listed company, and we were already hit with another crisis. Even in my personal life, nothing went according to plan. In May 2018, while I was cycling in Kuala Lumpur, a car came from behind at very high speeds and hit me hard, leaving me completely unconscious. I woke up at the intensive care unit of the hospital with fractures on my skull, bleeding in the brain, 3 of my 4 limbs were in a cast. And sometimes life knocks you down hard. And in this case, literally knocks you down hard and really painful. As I lay in that hospital bed, I was overwhelmed with emotion, fear, anxiety, depression. What was going to happen to me? Will I be able to lead a normal life again? What was going to happen to the new business that I had just started? How will I provide for my family? Right? All of us, when we go through these negative emotions, when we're faced by setbacks and failures, you realize there's no way I could find the answers to these big questions. When things become overwhelming, I needed to focus on the smallest things that I could do that were within my control and put aside the worries of the bigger questions. And so with the support of my family and hospital staff, I just focused on learning how to sit up from my bed and start to walk. So on the 7th day, I started to take my first steps in the ward, even when one of my legs was still fractured. But this gave me momentum. I celebrated these small wins, right? I keep focusing on what I can do rather than worry about the things that were then out of my control. So I deliberately stopped thinking about that driver that hit me, right? And told people who were asking me, what happened to him? Did I not want to know? But I was not angry. I didn't want to know, right? I wanted to use all my energy to heal and get stronger and not waste it on feeling angry at someone else, right? And so with momentum, I could start walking. I went on the treadmill on day 33 and slowly increasing the time from just 5 minutes a day to 10 to 15 to 30 minutes. By day 47, I could pick up the pace and I could start to run on the treadmill. Now the joy came 2 months after the accident when I could run outdoors, that feeling of liberation and elation. But an even bigger joy and the big psychological milestone was to be able to get back on a bicycle, a new bicycle, and to be able to ride outdoors again with my friends on day 84, less than 3 months from that accident. Momentum fuels more momentum. With physiotherapy sessions 5 days a week, many of them painful sessions, I worked on gaining my shoulder and arm mobility as my broken shoulder healed, right? And on day 112, I could get back a full rotation of my arm and I could start swimming again in the pool. By then, I had a very specific goal in mind. I wanted to get back to Ironman triathlon racing. I worked hard with my coaches and kept working on my strength and stamina and signed up for the Ironman triathlon race in Langkawi, Malaysia in November of that year. See, this is important to me because being a triathlete was a big part of my identity. So on day 174, less than 6 months from that accident, I was able to complete the Ironman 70.3 Langkawi Triathlon, swimming, cycling, and running. My motivation was I wanted to tell my children, and for parents out there, you know our children do not listen to what we tell them. They learn by observing what we do. Same thing with our team members. And the message for my children is, life is going to knock us down hard, very hard, and we can't control what's going to happen to us, but we can decide how we choose to respond to these challenges. So this is why it's important to understand that our initial reactions and impulses to things that happen to us are automatic, and it may limit us, right? Because our brains are designed for one primary purpose, which is to keep us alive, our survival instinct. But the way the brain does this is that it steers us away to its things that are familiar, things that are predictable and reliable. It does not like things that are unknown, risky, or dangerous. Because our brain receives 50 million sensory inputs every single moment, and we can only consciously process just 7 or 8. And so the brain filters out everything quickly based on these gut instincts, right? That is why when you meet someone, even before that person has said a single word, our brain has already made a judgment whether you like that person or not, right? And these quick judgments, they can be limiting. The brain may tell us that we cannot do something because it hasn't seen us succeed before. It tells us to stick to doing the same things and to avoid anything that's dangerous or unknown because that might cause us stress, right? It's the brain's warning signs. Danger, danger, danger. But my message to you is that stress, this danger sign, it's actually necessary. It's good for us. We need stress to perform our best. We don't want to avoid stress, but we need to learn how we can respond to it positively. You see, stress is a biological response when the brain wants the body to spring into action. If the brain senses danger, for example, if a lion were chasing an antelope in the savannah, the antelope's body experiences a surge of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, to get the heart to beat faster, the lungs to expand, and the muscles to be primed for action. These hormones also narrow the brain to only focus on the immediate threat. It shuts down the digestive system, it shuts down the reproductive system, and it even slows down the brain's ability to think creatively. It just wants to survive. Now, the lion who is chasing the antelope also needs to experience stress. Those same stress hormones also makes the lion's heart beat faster, the lungs to expand, and the muscles primed for action in order to catch the antelope. Because if the lion doesn't catch its prey for several days, it may starve to death. Now, in today's modern world, hopefully, none of you may have to experience the threat of a lion chasing you. But today's threat may come from our bosses being angry at us or our clients being upset, right? We experience pressures from sales targets or bills to pay at the end of the month, or maybe our spouse is unhappy with us. We experience the same hormonal reactions as if a lion is chasing after us. So stress occurs whether we're the predator or the prey. But we can choose whether we respond as a predator or we respond as a prey or a victim, right? It's our choice. And this is why some people enjoy the thrill of a roller coaster ride or skydiving while other people are deathly afraid of the same thing, right? Or even public speaking, right? People who skydive experience the same nervous energy, but they look at it not as something to avoid, but something that they channel into action. We choose how we look at stress. Now, unlike the antelope, when the lion stops chasing after it, because maybe the lion's out of breath, the antelope can go back to grazing again, right? And all the stress hormones just dissipate away. But for humans, we've evolved where it's harder for us to let go of stress feelings once the immediate threats go away. For some of us, even when the threat has not yet emerged, the boss has not become angry yet, the customer's not yet upset, we still have time to achieve our sales targets, or our spouse is not yet upset at us, we anticipate that it might happen and it already causes those stress hormones to surge. This is anxiety, where we become worried about potential threats that have not yet emerged. And when we worry, these videos keep playing in our head over and over. Now, for some other people, once the threats have passed, we still can't stop the videos from playing in our head. This is what we call depression. When something that has already passed, sometimes a long time ago, like childhood trauma, the memories keep playing in our heads over and over, and it makes us feel depressed. Now, to illustrate what happens to our bodies when we experience prolonged stress, anxiety, or depression, consider this interesting fact. So when I compete in an Ironman triathlon race in Langkawi, that one day of swimming and cycling and running, I can burn a staggering 6,000 calories. By the end of the day, I would have probably lost 2 or even 3 kilos of weight. A world champion chess grandmaster competing in a world championship chess tournament also burns 6,000 calories. Now, clearly not from the physical activity of moving chess pieces around, but from the brain working really hard, thinking about multiple chess scenarios 50 moves ahead. Because our brains, they represent only 2% of our body weight, but it consumes over 20% of all the calories that we eat, right? This is why when we're overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, and depression, with all the negative thoughts playing over and over in our heads, we become physically fatigued and tired. And over time, we become sick with high blood pressure and diabetes and heart diseases. So learning to build resilience and optimism and perseverance requires us to learn how to control these videos playing in our heads of these anxious thoughts of the future or the depressed thoughts of the past. Now, there are two things that I want to share with you. First, it's mind wandering. The average person experiences mind wandering 47% of the time when they're awake. That means the brain is thinking of another thought instead of the task that we're supposed to be doing. So for example, right, when you listen to me on this video, half of you may actually be doing something else, right? Like checking your WhatsApp messages or social media, answering emails, or writing a report, right? And that's one habit that most of us are guilty of, which is we're trying to simultaneously multitask. We think we're being productive by doing several things at once, but that's not what's happening. Our brain cannot multitask. It does one thing at a time. And what we're actually doing is we're jumping from one task to the other every few seconds, right? 7 seconds answering a WhatsApp message, 10 seconds listening to this webinar, then 12 seconds I'm focusing on writing an email, and 9 seconds talking to someone. Each time we shift from one task to the other, it takes the brain more energy to make that switch, right? Because imagine driving a car where you keep accelerating and braking, and turning every few seconds. That wears down the energy very fast and it burns more petrol. Driving efficiently is when we drive at a constant speed in one direction and only making turns periodically. So to train our brain to focus, we need to learn how to do one thing at a time. Right? Try spending 25 minutes writing a report while shutting down all your notifications and putting away your phone. When it comes to emails, do it in batches, right? For 25 minutes, I answer all my emails and then I close off the browser and I move on to another task. Even when we're having dinner with our families, right? Learn to have dinner and be present with our family members instead of trying to simultaneously send WhatsApp messages while we eat or watch TV while we eat. Now, the next mental resilience building technique I've used is visualization. This is a technique that top athletes do over and over again to replace those negative thoughts in their heads with thoughts of the outcomes that they want. This requires more effort, right? Sitting down in a quiet place and really taking 10 to 15 minutes to visually imagine the successful outcome that you're working towards, right? Build it up in 3 areas to focus, right? The first is visual elements, the imagery, the colors, the people in the background and surroundings. Next, the kinesthetics, how our body moves. Imagine the parts of your body in action, whether you're giving a speech or closing a deal or participating in an event. Go through the motions in your head. And finally, right, add in the auditory elements, the sounds, right, from what you say, what other people say, and the background noise, like crowds cheering for you. Imagine it all first. The final element that I want to share today is surrounding ourselves with people who energize us and minimizing the time we spend with people who drain our energy. And I'm sure you can relate to this, right? Who are the people you know that you'll be inspired and motivated and be much more positive and optimistic after you spend time with them? And I bet you'll also know people in your lives that create negativity, sow doubt, and drain your energy. So life is full of challenges, and trying to get through it all alone is doubly difficult. So remember, when I talked about how when we are stressed, a surge of hormones surge through our body, what is less known is that our body also sends another hormone, oxytocin. It's the love hormone or the cuddle hormone, right? That helps people connect and bond with one another. It's the hormone that floods a mother and a newborn baby to build that connection. And so our body is telling us that when we're stressed, we need to reach out to other humans and lean on them for support. So choosing to spend time with positive people makes all the difference. And the great thing about the Nuskin community and the Nuskin family is that there's so many positive and supportive people here. Learn from each other, lean on one another, and most importantly, energize and boost each other. All the best. Hello again, my friends from Nuskin. Thank you for joining me here at Nuskin Live Virtual Expo. For those of you who caught my first video, you'll know that I talked about how our brain orients us towards what we're familiar and comfortable, what we're used to doing, and it doesn't like it when we try to do new unknown things. But being innovative, though, is about overriding this natural instinct and allowing our curiosity to come out and challenge ourselves. So I want to talk about the process of being innovative by focusing not on just using a latest technology or changing for the sake of changing, but on solving problems that our clients face in a way that no one else is doing, and using repetition to keep trying different ideas until good ones emerge. And being comfortable that most of our ideas may fail before we can finally discover the breakthrough ones. So, you might recall, right, that I had to build an airline from scratch in 2007. And one of the reasons AirAsia X had to be created as a separate airline is because AirAsia did not believe in the viability of going long haul, right? They had been a successful low-cost carrier in Southeast Asia, and once they became successful, they became unwilling to challenge what made them successful in the past, right? So we want to keep doing what has made us successful in the past. And even the Singapore Airlines CEO in 2007, when he heard this crazy idea of building a long-haul low-cost airline, he dismissed it, right? He said it wouldn't work, right? So let's use one example about challenging common beliefs, right? So normally, a low-cost airline, when they think about seats and passengers, right? Some of you may recall, if you were traveling back in 2007, that low-cost carriers did not have seat assignments, right? There were no seat numbers on your boarding pass, right? You had to rush on board and grab whatever seats were available. Why? Because they believed then, right? This made passengers board faster, right? That was how the giants in the low-cost airline model operated. Southwest Airlines in the US, EasyJet and Ryanair in Europe, and AirAsia, Tiger, Cebu Pacific all operated that way, right? And the way AirAsia, for example, made extra money was to charge passengers who wanted to be first in line to board with a service called express boarding, right? So, but if you did not want to pay, you're going to have to be boarding later. So when I started AirAsia X, I felt this wasn't the best customer experience, especially on a long-haul airline, right? Someone like me, for example, I've got a small bladder. I really always want to prefer the aisle seat so that I have good access to the lavatory. Some other people may prefer the window seat so that they can rest against it and also look at the nice views, while other people may want to make sure that the family of four is always sitting together. Or some, they may even want to make sure that mother-in-law is at least 7 rows behind. So we introduced seat assignments, where you can choose your seat if you're willing to pay a small fee. But even if you did not want to pay, you'll still get a seat assignment when you check in, so that the boarding process is more civilized and everyone has a seat waiting for them. Now, we implemented this when we launched in 2007, but it took AirAsia 2 years before they too eventually adopted it in 2009. Because once you're used to doing something one way, it becomes very hard to change, even when you can clearly see the benefits of a better customer experience and more revenue. EasyJet studied us and only changed in 2012, and Ryanair followed later in 2013. So, can you see why it's hard for us to change the way we approach work if we're so used to doing things only one way? Now, even after we launched seat assignments, we still had 50% of our passengers unwilling to pay for seat assignments. So how do we come up with ideas to keep innovating, right? We don't believe in asking customers what they want through focus group interviews, because customers may not tell you about things that they've never experienced before. Instead, I believe in observing our customers and finding pain points that they may not be consciously aware of. For example, what's the first thing that you do when you sit in your assigned seat? I bet most of you are going to start to think, Will someone come and sit next to me? And if it does, well, am I going to be lucky enough to find a row of empty seats so that I can have the whole row to myself? And of course, if that happened, jackpot, you're going to be so happy on that flight. How do we know this? Because we're passengers too, and we observe what our customers do. And we know that on average, an airline is only 80% full, which means on average, 20% of the seats are empty. But we don't know beforehand which flights will have those extra empty seats and which flights are going to be sold out from last-minute buyers. Because if we try to pre-sell a row or an extra seat, we could be losing revenue from people wanting to buy seats at the last minute, and usually those are much higher fares. So we came up with the idea of selling an empty seat option, something no airline had done before. We offered our customers the chance to get 3 seats in a row, but not a guarantee, by paying a small fee up front, which is dynamically priced based on expected demand, whether it's $20, $30, or $40, for example. And on the day that you check in, if there are extra seats available on that flight, we'll put on your boarding pass 27A, B, C, so that you can confidently walk on the plane knowing that you're going to have a whole row of seats waiting for you. But if on that day, all the seats are sold in the last minute at high prices, when you check in, we say, "Oh, I'm sorry, your empty seat option is not available today." We refund you back that option price. So the customer doesn't lose when there's no extra seat, but gains a lot of value at an affordable price, 80% of the time, right? And that revenue goes straight to the bottom line for us because there's no cost. Those seats would have flown empty anyway. And no airline in the world had thought about this before. Usually, airlines tend to just benchmark and look at what other airlines do. But we focus on coming out with new ideas based on the problems that our customers face instead. Now, we didn't stop there, right? We kept thinking, what are the problems that customers have when it comes to airline seats? Because there were still people who were unwilling to pay for seat assignments or empty seat options. Another idea was to address the problem of passengers being worried that there might be a screaming baby or toddler sitting near them, especially on a long-haul flight late at night. What if we could guarantee that if you paid to choose a seat in one section of the plane, there would be no kids around you? We created the world's first quiet zone where no children under 12 were allowed in this front section of economy seats. Even CNN and New York Times wrote about it, but the headlines were, "AirAsia X discriminates against families with young children." But actually the parents appreciated it, because even though now they have to sit at the back sections, if anybody gives them that disapproving look, if their child throws a tantrum, they can just say, "Don't complain, should have sat in the quiet zone." Now, because we called it our quiet zone, we thought, what if we could create a special ambiance with mood lighting to designate the seat zone? And so we asked our engineers, and they dutifully got 3 quotations from aircraft lighting specialists. But each was $75,000, $87,000, $112,000 per aircraft. The latest LED technology that can change colors from red, orange, blue, green, purple, time with sunrise, time with sunset. Wonderful. But being calculative, we realized that it didn't make economic sense because our seat assignment fees were low and we couldn't sell enough upgrades to justify that capital investment. But ours was a culture where we shared a challenge openly across the whole organization. And the technicians, they heard about this, right? And they came up to me and they said, "Hey boss, we have an idea. We go to hardware store and we buy colored wrapping paper and we wrap the fluorescent bulbs. And so we created this calming blue effect for just a few dollars." Now, I have to clarify, because it's not a straightforward process, because the airline industry, everything is highly regulated. You need Civil Aviation Authority approval just to put a sticker in the toilet. So we had to pass multiple tests, including a burn test to make sure that the colored wrapping was not flammable. We had to pass a brightness test because if there was an emergency, there's not enough time for the flight attendants to unwrap the light bulbs. And after several modifications, we secured full certification to deploy it. See, sometimes innovation need not be high technology or costly. It can come from basic ideas provided we're willing to challenge conventional thinking. Now, while I share with you the successes, I also want to share with you the many failures. Because for every one successful idea like seat assignments or empty seat option or quiet zone, we had 8 or 9 failures. But we needed to be comfortable that many of our ideas will not work. So here's one of them, right? We thought we would be the low-cost airline, the first one to have full in-seat, in-flight entertainment systems with the latest digital touchscreen technology on every economy seat, where you can pre-order your meal straight from your seat. The order goes straight to the galley without having to wait for the flight attendant to come to you. Great idea in theory. But when we launched it, it was a big disappointment. We learned that people want instant gratification. Like when they order something, they want it now. They didn't want to wait 20 or 30 minutes for the food to come. But for the flight attendants, it became a mess because instead of going with their trolleys down the aisle, serving people one row at a time, now the orders were coming at different times, right? Row 13 wants chicken rice. Then I got to go to row 32 who wants a Coke, and row 24 wants a hamburger. It drove them mad. Now, the other reason we installed these systems was because we thought, hey, maybe we could get people to pay a small fee to watch movies. But turns out, many people refused to pay. And Hollywood studios don't trust airlines to declare how many people watch which movies. They charge us a royalty fee for every single movie title, times every flight, times every plane, right? So we start with this huge fixed cost, and we couldn't find enough ways to generate enough take-up. Because our Asian customers, they would rather stare at that screen, where the plane goes around the globe for 8 hours instead of just paying $10 to watch movies. So we decided to scrap the whole system. It was a $12 million write-off, but no one was fired. We didn't waste time or energy to blame each other. We just moved on to something else. And so what I keep telling my team though, is it's not about being afraid of failing, but even more importantly is we must be afraid of success. Success can lull us into complacency. We need to be humble. If an idea works, we can't rest on our laurels. We've got to move on to the next thing. Remember what I said earlier about how in 2007, the CEO of Singapore Airlines dismissed the idea of a long-haul low-cost airline, whether it will work or not? Well, you got to give them credit because they studied us carefully, and 5 years later, they launched their own low-cost, long-haul airline. And everything we did, they would quickly replicate it. Remember Quiet Zone? Well, less than a year after we launched it, they launched Scoot in Silence, no children under 12. And when I saw their ad, I noticed, multicolored lights. Well, I know how much that cost them. And so I have to keep reminding my team all the time. The only advantage we have as a small startup is our speed and agility. Bigger players like Singapore Airlines, they're always going to have more capital, more established brand, deeper distribution, a larger customer base. But whatever we do, they can quickly replicate it. But that's okay, because as long as they're copying us, they will always be behind us. As long as we keep innovating, we're always going to be ahead of them. With speed, what big companies do in 1 year, we have to do every week, because great ideas don't come from once a year brainstorming or strategic planning. We have to challenge ourselves to be innovative every single week. And we do this by asking ourselves 3 powerful questions each Friday. Number 1, what went well this week? Great, let's keep doing that. Number 2, what didn't go well? What went wrong? Okay, let's stop doing that. And the most important question is, what do we learn from our customers, our competition, the government, changes in technology, that we're going to try one new idea next week? We challenge ourselves to do one new thing every single week, because the only way to discover a great idea is we first go through 19 bad ideas first, and we learn from each one of them. So Team Nuskin, it's a brave new world out there. What has worked for you in the past may not continue to work for you in the future. And if you're unwilling to change, then someone else may be lurking to try the new things and discover new ways to serve your customers better. So stay curious, move fast, learn from failures, and mostly, remain humble and hungry. Thank you.